Adam Hodge, managing director at Bully Pulpit International, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Maura Gillespie, founder and principal at Blue Stack Strategies. Great to have you both here. I'm not sure, Adam, your thoughts on where this goes, but everyone's telling us that Pete Hegseth has the votes. What was the purpose of the exercise? Did Democrats make any difference today?
Well, two things happened today that I think are worth noting. One, John Curtis, at an event earlier today, expressed his reservations about a number of President Trump's national security picks. And so there's some question about the math of whether he will get the 50 votes. I don't think it's a done deal quite yet. But the thing I took a step back and remembering, yesterday I had the privilege of being at the State Department for President Joe Biden's last foreign policy speech. And I saw, Secretary Lloyd Austin sitting in the front row, a man who served with distinction for 4 decades, commanded troops in Iraq, Afghanistan. The split screen between him and Pete Hegseth could not be any greater. I mean, Pete Hegseth is barely qualified to run a lemonade stand, let alone the Department of Defense with 3 million people, $850 billion budget. So I think there are fresh questions today, and Tammy Duckworth at the end nailed it. He's not qualified to serve as Secretary of Defense, and questions about whether he has the judgment and experience to do the job remain for a number of senators, and I think some still on the Republican side.
Well, he, of course, is a veteran himself. He, too, has served this country, Adam, and many senators did thank him for that today. Maura, as we consider that what Adam was just speaking to, this notion that maybe he does not have the qualifications as defense secretaries of the past, Donald Trump didn't necessarily have the same resume as American presidents before he was elected the first time, and again, the second time. And this is who Donald Trump chose. The American people elected Donald Trump, and this is his will. So for that reason, do you think the Senate is going to give him what he wants on this one?
I think when it comes to Pete Hegseth, I see that nomination going through pretty easily, in large part because you're right, the standards have changed. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but they have. And so many times today you heard Democrats questioning Pete Hegseth about his marital status. And so for things that do not have to do with the job of Secretary of Defense. And unfortunately, that was one of the bigger sound bites you heard. And I think it loses the point of this election. The American people voted for change. They voted against being told, this moral superiority that so many in the Democratic Party have positioned themselves to be. But to me, today's hearing also just showed a disarray of Democrats. There's no leadership. They didn't have a very concise message, because if they had, to Adam's point, focused solely on his lack of experience in managing such a large department and such a large budget, they would have had probably more success. Unfortunately, they chose to go all over the map and hit so many times on his personal life that didn't really amount to much today.
His personal life, also some other statements that he's made in a series of, as we know, books that he's written, interviews that he's conducted. Democratic Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii got to some of these in this exchange with Pete Hegseth. For instance, how far he would go if ordered by Trump.
Would you carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs?
I saw 50 Secret Service agents get injured by rioters trying to jump over the fence, set the church on fire, and destroy a statue.
That sounds to me that you will comply with such an order. You will shoot protesters in the leg.
She was just answering the questions for him that he wouldn't answer. Interesting style by the senator. Do we believe that about Pete Hegseth?
I think if he couldn't answer those questions, I think it raises real questions about whether he would have the judgment, independence, and leadership to stand up to the president and say, Mr. President, I don't think that's a good idea, as many of Donald Trump's secretaries of defense did in his first administration. Time and again, whether it was about the credible allegations of sexual assault, whether it was about his inability to run the 2 veterans organizations, whether he would continue to actually uphold the standard of the rule of law and the Geneva Convention of the way our troops conduct themselves in combat. The reason it matters is because who the Secretary of Defense is sends a message to the troops of what's okay. And I think he, by the answers he gave today, sends a signal to many of the rank and file that it is okay to torture, that it is okay to commit sexual assault, that it is okay to run the department and run an organization shoddily and managing the finances. So that's why I think the questions today were so powerful. And I think it's incumbent upon the senators of the Armed Services Committee to question whether they actually should give him a vote.
I'm glad, Adam, that you raised this notion of whether or not the Secretary of Defense and the president are going to butt heads at all, or if this potential secretary would be willing to do that. It was raised, Maura, in the hearing today by, I believe, Senator Peters, that we saw 5 either confirmed or acting secretaries of defense during the first Trump administration. If he's able to be confirmed, what is Pete Hegseth going to need to do to stay in the job? To stay in the job, does he have to just follow the orders of the commander-in-chief without question?
I mean, that's largely why Donald Trump chose him. I mean, it's not a surprise to anyone who's watched Donald Trump's first term and then watching who he appointed or nominated, this time around. He was looking for people who were going to follow his orders and do the job that he wants them to do. Being loyal to the commander-in-chief, that's not a negative. But at the same time, these positions are the reason we have these confirmation hearings is because the Senate wants to know that you're going to uphold your oath to do the job that you are raising your right hand to say that you will do. And that's not necessarily always dependent upon who the person is at the top. It is what's the well-being of the country and of that department. And so, but I think in this case, those are the standards that we have had for decades, right? That is the idea that we have all subscribed to and believe in, but they've changed. The standards have changed with Donald Trump being in the White House. And I look forward to a day where we can respect our institutions and respect our oaths. But in this new normal, the standards are not the same, and pretending as though they are and harping on questions that aren't getting answers to, will he do the job and how will he do the job, it was a missed opportunity by Democrats today.
I realize that this trial is not going to happen here, but we actually have the rest of Donald Trump's national security team and others who will go through confirmation hearings the way Pete Hegseth did today. Should this be brought forth to Tulsi Gabbard, to Kash Patel, for instance, for their reaction?
You know, when we look back at leaders and people who have had positions of power, we tend to look more fondly on them in hindsight, right? Hindsight is often 20/20. I think in the case of Donald Trump, January 6th will forever be tied to his legacy. And it will also have changed the way that we, conduct business as far as where we hold the bar of what's appropriate, what's tolerated, what's acceptable. The bar is gone. And it needs to, January 6th cannot be just glossed over. It cannot just be forgotten. Yes, a conviction and a trial is not going to happen for Donald Trump, but for what happened that day and the things that led up to it, as the January 6th committee and this report also shows, it should absolutely be questioned upon people who are taking positions that would impact what the DOJ does or the FBI does, and when it comes to an insurrection that happened. It was such a monumental day, and I know for so many that they didn't feel the direct impacts, but for those of us who were close to it, but it should jar everyone. It should appall everyone, whether you're Republican or Democrat. It's not something just to be ignored, and I think that this report matters for history and for the legacy impacts of how we would look back on a Trump presidency.
Republicans and Democrats can agree on that.
Yeah.
At least that's one thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we end it on that note?
We'll keep searching for more where that came from. Adam Hodge and Maura Gillespie, we thank you for a great